This bio video is about Lil C-Style, who was an original Dogg Pound member and former Death Row Records affiliated artist. And Lil C-Style has never really been a huge mainstream artist, and there isn't a lot of information available about him online, but for the true Death Row fans, I'm sure you'll know exactly who he is. Many people who are familiar with his music consider him as a dope artist, who's known for his distinctive voice and unique rap style, and he's considered as a real G and hustler from Long Beach. And unfortunately, Lil C-Style is currently incarcerated for attempted murder. So in this video, we're gonna do a complete breakdown of his life and career as a rap artist in chronological order. Lil C-Style's real name is Ronald Gillian, and he was born on July the 7th in 1974. When he was 4 years old, his parents split up and he ended up living with his mother. He's an only child and grew up in South Central and Long Beach, as he also mentioned in the track titled What You Gonna Be When You Grow Up, which was released on his solo album Blackballed in 2004.
Growing up in South Central and Long Beach, a single mom and her son was tough enough. No pops in the house, was pretty fucked up.
As he got older, he moved in with his father because he was causing too much stress for his mom, and he also got caught with a gun.
I can't stay in school in 6th grade smoking blood, wearing 501s, getting caught with guns. Had to move with pops cause I was stressing mom.
And later on, he went back to live with his mom again and became friends with Big C-Style, who gave him the nickname Lil C-Style. And before he got that name, his nickname was Ron C, which he also mentions in What You Gonna Be When You Grow Up.
When I burnt out Pops, I was back at Mom's. Then I met Big Style and changed my name from Ron C to Style and started hanging out.
And in several of his tracks, such as Easy to Be a Soldier When There Ain't No War, Buster's the Rider version, and Connect Game, he uses the same lyrics to express what he wanted to do since he was young.
When I was young, I used to want to be a drug dealer. Never had no dreams of being no motherfucking rapper. When I was young, I used to want to be a drug dealer. I never had no dreams of being no motherfucking rap singer. When I was young, I used to want to be a drug dealer. I never had no dreams of being no hip-hop rap singer.
And Lil C-Style's homie Big C-Style is known as an OG. You might also recognize him from the Murder Was the Case movie, where he also played a role alongside Snoop. And he's also the one who rolled Snoop Dogg out on stage in a wheelchair for that iconic MTV Live performance in 1993. And Big C-Style and Lil C-Style and other rappers from Long Beach were also very tight with Snoop Dogg when he was beginning to make a name for himself as an up-and-coming star under Death Row Records. After Snoop Dogg released his debut album Doggy Style, he began working on a new project, which was the Murder Was the Case movie. And the soundtrack was also released for the movie under Death Row Records, featuring several artists including Snoop Dogg and the Dogg Pound. And one of the tracks on that album is titled Who Got Some Gangsta-ish, and the beat was produced by Superfly, and on that track you can hear Snoop Dogg, Dez, Corrupt, and also Lil C-Style and Swoop G. And this was the first song ever recorded for both Lil C-Style and Swoop G. And in a 2004 interview, Lil C-Style was asked, "How old were you when you appeared on the Murder Was the Case soundtrack?" And he replied, quote, "I was 19 years old when I did that, and I wrote it in St. Louis. I wasn't even a rapper, just a hustler. Then I put words together on things that went on in the neighborhood. Just the basic words, just something people want to hear. And it took off in the right direction. My motivation was money and seeing Dez and Corrupt go up. I knew Dez from a long time. I rapped on Murder Was the Case. That was the first rap I ever wrote. I never had any raps written down. I just go and do it." End quote. In 1995, the documentary The Show was released, and there's also a clip of Lil C-Style where he's in a trailer with Snoop Dogg and other DPG members, where he spits a part of the track Who Got Some Gangsta-ish, and in this track he disses Lil Half Dead, who's another rapper from Long Beach. And up next is a small clip of that video. And in his part, Lil C-Style raps about an incident where Swoop G allegedly took some stuff from Lil Half Dead, and Lil C-Style wasn't there that day when it happened, so he raps, And a fun fact is that in an interview that Badass did years later, after the track was recorded, He mentioned that Lil Hef Dad's wife and C-Style's wife are sisters. Now Badass didn't specify which C-Style he was referring to, so I'm not 100% sure whether he meant Lil C-Style or Big C-Style, but it's an interesting connection nonetheless. After the Murder Was the Case soundtrack, Lil C-Style got signed to Snoop Dogg's first label as a member of the LBC Crew, and Doggy Style Records was a sub-label of Death Row Records. And this was around the same time that Snoop Dogg was working on his second album, The Dogfather. And in the track Snoop's Upside Your Head, Snoop Dogg refers to the sub-label Doggy Style Records with this line.
Now, Doggy Style Records is now official. Getting money out the biz ain't with my initials. Shipping records overseas.
And the LBC Crew was supposed to be the first group under the Doggy Style Records label. And the LBC stands for Long Beach City, and in an interview Lil C-Style explained, quote, LBC is a group that Snoop made and named out of Badass, Technique, and myself. 3 people from the beach, east side. I'm always cool, I like to gamble, end quote. And as he mentioned in that interview, Technique, Badass, and Lil C-Style form the core of the LBC Crew. And they scored a hit with the song Beware of My Crew, which also featured Trey D and So Central. And a common misconception is that Trey D and So Central were also part of the LBC Crew, but that wasn't the case. And that's why the track Beware of My Crew credits the LBC Crew featuring Trey D and So Central. And Badass, rest in peace, also spoke about this in an interview, and he said, quote, the original LBC Crew is Badass, Technique, and Lil C-Style. That was the original LBC Crew that Snoop created. And if you remember, a lot of people thought that all of us were the LBC Crew, which we kinda were. And when he referred to all of us, he also referred to Trey D and So Central. And after that he said, but what it was, when we put out Beware of My Crew, it was LBC Crew featuring Trey D and South Central. In that same interview, Badass also spoke about the dynamics of the group, and he said, the LBC Crew was Badass, Technique, and Lil C-Style. That was a dope combination because C-Style was more of a laid-back non-rapper, Technique was more of an MC, and I was more like an MC gangster rapper. So it was tight because all of us were different. C-Style was straight gangster. Lil C-Style ain't even a rapper, he's a gangbanger that can rap for real. End quote. And the track Beware of My Crew was originally intended to be on the LBC Crew's debut album, but was instead released under A Thin Line Between Love and Hate soundtrack. A music video was also shot for the track, and both Snoop and Dez also made an appearance in that video. They also performed the track live on stage on an episode of Soul Train in season 25, episode 19, which aired on February the 24th in '96. During their time with Death Row, the LBC Crew recorded an unreleased album titled Haven't You Heard, which was never officially released until February the 8th in 2011, when it was finally dropped by Wide Awake/Death Row. And supposedly the album wasn't released back in the day because Suge didn't want it to happen. And Badass also spoke about this in an interview, and he said this about it, quote, Suge kinda got in the way. I don't want to place the blame totally on him, like he was just totally against it, but what happened was he wanted Snoop to sign our project with Death Row, and Snoop hadn't. But he had recorded it at K&M Studios that Suge was leasing for them to record a Death Row project. So what Snoop did, he recorded the LBC Crew on his studio time that he was supposed to be doing a project. And later in that same interview, Badass also said, and we finished our record before Dog Food ironically, and our record was being held back, cause how are we gonna bring the LBC Crew before the Dogg Pound? And no one's ever heard the Dogg Pound record with Dez and Corrupt, but they're waiting on these guys from being all over Dre's record, being all over Snoop's record, and now it's their turn. End quote. In an online interview that Snoop Dogg did years ago, he also hinted at another reason the LBC Crew album never came out. And Snoop explained this in an interview that he did in 2004 when the interviewer asked him why the LBC Crew album wasn't released. And Snoop said this, quote, thank Lil C-Style for that. He lost his goddamn mind 2 or 3 days before I was gonna put the shit out. He lost his motherfucking mind thinking he was a star, telling me that he won an X amount of dollars, he want this and want that. So we had a meeting at my house and he had the tape. Because we didn't have it on CD, we had it on tape. And he broke the tape and said, I don't want to be in the group no more. He broke the tape down and I looked at Trey D like, what you want to do? And he was like, I'm staying down. So Lil Style shook, broke the whole group up. And that's why on my album The Dogfather, I had Technique, Badass, Trey D on there. All of them except Lil Style. Everybody was on The Dogfather except him. End quote. And it's true that all the members of the LBC crew except Lil C-Style are featured on Snoop's second album, The Dogfather. In fact, some tracks originally recorded for the LBC Crew album ended up being released on The Dogfather. The tracks Blueberry and Gold Rush were both intended for the LBC Crew album but made their way onto Snoop's project instead. Another track titled Out the Moon was also recorded during the LBC Crew sessions, and it was later released on the Gridlock soundtrack. On the original version of that track, Lil C-Style had a verse, but in the version that was released on the soundtrack, his verse was replaced by a verse from Tupac. As mentioned earlier, the Haven't You Heard album was eventually released in 2011, but there are a few differences between the version that came out and the original album as it was intended. But I'll go into more detail about that in a separate video. So now let's do a quick breakdown of all the LBC Crew tracks that Lil C-Style was featured on. And the first track is Beware of My Crew. It was released on the A Thin Line Between Love and Hate soundtrack, as I already mentioned, and besides that it was also released as a single. And on that track you can hear the LBC Crew and also Trady and South Central. And there's an explicit and also a clean version, and the clean lyrics were also used for the music video that was recorded for it. The next track is the Beware of My Crew remix. It was also released on the single and also on the original Reference album, and all the lyrics are the same as the original version, but this remix version has a completely different beat that was also produced by DJ Pooh. And this track was originally intended to appear on the group's debut album, as you can see on the original track list, but it was not released on the LBC Crew album that was released in 2011. The next track is titled Dippin' in My Lolo. It was released on the 2011 album, and it was also mentioned on the original album tracklist, and it's a dope track, and Snoop Dogg is also featured on that record. The next track is titled Get Up to Get Down. It was also released on the LBC Crew album that was released in 2011, and it was also mentioned on the tracklist for the original album. And it's a smooth, laid-back track with a dope beat. And the next LBC Crew track featuring Lil C-Style is titled Flossin'. It was also released on the LBC Crew album in 2011, and it was also mentioned on the tracklist for the original album, and besides that it was also released on the 19th Street LBC compilation. And this track is also a classic in my opinion. It's also a smooth, laid-back track with a nice beat. The chorus is dope, and Trady, Badass and Lil C-Style all drop some dope verses on it. The next track is titled Feels Good to Be DPG. It was released on the LBC Crew album in 2011, and an alternate version with a different beat was intended for the original album, and Snoop Dogg was also featured on this track. The next track is titled Gangsta. It was also released on the LBC Crew album in 2011. It was not mentioned on the tracklist for the original album, and online you can also find an alternate mix of this track, which is very similar to the track that was released on the 2011 album, but it has some minor differences. Another LBC Crew track that Lil C-Style is featured on is titled Jackass Reunion. It was released on the LBC Crew album in 2011, and this track is not mentioned on the tracklist for the original album, but it was also recorded during the sessions for the LBC Crew album, so it's nice that they included this track on the album that was released in 2011. The next track is the original version of Out the Moon. It was released on the LBC Crew album in 2011, and it was also mentioned on the tracklist for the original album. As I mentioned earlier in this video, it was later released on the Gridlock movie soundtrack in '97. However, Lil C-Style's verse was replaced by a verse of Tupac. There's also a radio version of this track with slightly different lyrics. There's also an Out the Moon remix that was produced by Dez with a different beat, and for this version there's also an explicit and also a radio version. The next LBC Crew track that Lil C-Style was featured on is titled Doggy Style 96. Snoop Dogg and Warren G are also featured on that track. It was recorded during the studio sessions for the LBC Crew album, and it was also mentioned on the original tracklist, but it was not released on the album that was released in 2011 by Wide Awake / Death Row. However, the track was released on another Wide Awake release in 2009. The next track is titled Six Shooter. It was also released on the Ultimate Death Row compilation in 2009. This track was also recorded during the studio sessions for the original LBC Crew album, but it was not mentioned on the tracklist for the original album, and it was also not released on the album in 2011. And Snoop Dogg also mentioned in an interview once that he produced the beat and that he's also the one that's singing on the chorus, but his voice was changed because they used a vocoder. And the last track on this list is kinda rare. It's titled Deuce Deuce, and an alternate title for this track is Crooked, and it was released on a bootleg album titled DPG Dog Shit Volume 2. And the beat might sound familiar to you because it was also used for a TV commercial for Cyanide, and the same beat was also used for an unreleased Snoop Dogg track that's titled Gangsta's Life, which you can find online.
Ain't no style like C-Style, cause C-Style is a thriller. G stacked in my pockets, known for straight peeling niggas on the dice or taking niggas' lives.
So that was a quick list of all the LBC Crew tracks that Lil C-Style was featured on. In '97, tensions began to rise between Snoop and Death Row Records, and if you want the full story and all the details, make sure to check out the video on the channel titled Snoop Dogg vs. Suge and Death Row Beef Origins. And there's 3 parts on the channel, so make sure to check it out if you want to know all the details. But due to these issues, Snoop could no longer use the name LBC Crew, and he formed a new group called the Eastsiders. And in an interview, Lil C-Style also mentioned that he was part of the group, and he said, quote, "I was signed to Snoop's original label Doggy Style, and I was one of the original Eastsiders too." End quote. And in 1998, the Eastsiders debuted on the Ride movie soundtrack with the track titled Feel So Good, and this was credited to the Eastsiders featuring Snoop Dogg. And the Eastsiders group included Lil C-Style and Technique, and Crooked I also might have been a member of the group because he's also featured on the track. However, I'm not 100% sure if Crooked I was an official member of the group. The track was produced by Battlecat, and overall it was a solid track. Another track recorded was titled Eastside Up, Eastsiders. The song features Lil C-Style, Technique, Snoop Dogg and Trey D. And Lil C-Style's verse from this track was later reused on the track titled 1999. And this was a song from Daz's album Raw that was released in 2000. And the track Eastside Up, Eastsiders was listed on an album that was released in 2013 titled The 19 Vault. However, they made a mistake because it appeared on the track list, but instead of Eastside Up, Eastsiders, they replaced it with a track titled Eastside Connect Game, and this track appears twice on the album. And this was another track that Lil C-Style did together with Snoop Dogg, and both tracks were recorded independently under Snoop's Doghouse Records and also Beach City Records, and that was in collaboration with Big C-Style, and they recorded these tracks during the transitional phase when Snoop no longer recorded for Death Row Records and before he signed with No Limit Records. And at the end of the track Eastside Connect Game, Snoop gives a shout out to Doghouse Records and Beach City Records.
Doghouse, Beach City, Eastside Up, you know?
Unfortunately, apart from the track on the Ride movie soundtrack, no official projects were ever released by the Eastsiders, and the group disbanded. A few years later, in 2000, Snoop Dogg rebranded and relaunched the group, and the name of this group was spelled slightly different, and Trey D and Goldie Loc were part of the group, replacing the original members. Lil C-Style also mentioned in an interview that besides Doggy Style Records, he was later also signed to New Tribe Records and 19th Street Records, and this was between 96 and 99, and Lil C-Style recorded several tracks for compilation albums released under these labels. And in 1996, the promo single and music video for the track G's Come Out at Night by the Low Life Gangsters featuring Crooked I and Lil C-Style was released. It's a very solid track with a nice beat, and in 1998 he appeared on a couple of tracks that were released on the 19th Street LBC compilation, and one of those tracks was titled Busters, and they also released a music video for that track as well. And the original version of Busters was released as a promo single in 97, and on this version you can also hear a verse from Swoop G, but on the version that was released on the 19th Street LBC compilation and also for the music video, Swoop G was replaced by Trey D. Another track that Lil C-Style was featured on that was released on the 19th Street LBC compilation was titled Paper Chase, and he also appeared on the track Flossin' that was also released on this album, and this was the same track that was actually recorded for the LBC Crew album that I already covered in this video. In 99, Lil C-Style also appeared on the compilation album titled Escape from Death Row on the track Now That I'm Older alongside Young Life and Hit from the LBC. And years later, in 2013, the album Big C-Style Presents The 19 Vault Volume 1 was released, and on this album you can hear tracks that were recorded in the 90s by rappers from the LBC such as Crooked I, Badass, The Lowlifes, Snoop Dogg, and Lil C-Style also appeared on several tracks including Gangsta Gangsta. The lyrics from Lil C-Style's verse were the same as Snoop's lyrics on a verse that he did on the track titled Midnight Love, and also on another track that Snoop did titled Poor Young Dave.
Cheevious and devious, that's just my life. I was putting the serve down with cabbie just to keep the cluckers buzz. Some of the money making the young hustlers from the other side was plotting on a jack move trying to hoorah.
Mischievous and devious is how my life was. Putting the serve down with cabbie just to keep the cluckers buzz. Some of the money making motherfuckers from the other side was thinking about a jack move trying to hoorah.
Another track that appeared on the 19 Volts Volume 1 was titled Streets, the demo version, and Lil C-Style also did a verse on that track. The track Eastside Connect Game was also released on this album. I already covered this track earlier in this video, and I already mentioned that the track Eastside Up, which is Eastside Up Eastsiders, was mentioned on the tracklist from this album, but if you play the song instead of the track Eastside Up Eastsiders, they made a mistake and they replaced it with the track Eastside Connect Game, which therefore appeared twice on this album. Lil C-Style also appeared on a bootleg album titled the ESONGC compilation, and this bootleg album included an explicit version of the track G's Come Out at Night, and he also appeared on another track on that album titled Where the Hoes At, and on this track he reused his lyrics from the LBC Crew track Flossin'. And in 2010, the 19th Street Greatest Hits mixtape dropped featuring Lil C-Style on the track The 10 Chronic Commandments, and this was a remake of the classic track from Notorious B.I.G., The 10 Crack Commandments, and he used similar lyrics as Biggie on the same beat.
Rule number uno, never let no one know how many pounds you hold, cause you know.
And around 97 and 98, shortly before Snoop Dogg signed with No Limit Records, he was working independently, as I also explained in detail in the video Snoop Dogg vs Suge and Death Row Crazy Beef Part 1. And Snoop planned to wait out his contract with Death Row Records, which was almost done, and then he wanted to release an album titled F Death Row under Mac 10's label. And he also hooked up with Lil C-Style again, which Lil Style also mentioned in an interview, and he said, quote, "I was signed to Snoop first," and this referred to the LBC Crew, where he was a member of, that was signed to Doggy Style Records, as I've already explained in this video. And then he said, "Then I signed to C-Style's record label. Then we started doing other shit. I think I even went back to Snoop again and tried some more shit." End quote. And one of the tracks that Snoop and Lil Style recorded together around this time was titled Death Row is Bitches. And as the title already indicates, this was a diss track to Death Row Records, in which Snoop and Lil C-Style dissed Suge Knight and Death Row Records. And one of the things that Lil Style said was this.
You know, I read it in the paper. Damn, I thought Suge was a gangster. You can't survive trying to dig a nigga, and that's real.
And around this time, he also recorded another track together with Snoop Dogg and Technique. And the track was Baller Dog. And you can find this track online. And Snoop also used the same beat and the same lyrics for the tracks Crazy After Dark and Never Again, which feature only Snoop Dogg. And there are two other tracks that Lil C-Style did together with Snoop Dogg that might have been recorded around 97 and 98, or perhaps around the LBC Crew era, around 95, 96. And one of those tracks is titled When You Grow Up, in which Lil Style reused some lyrics from the original version of Out the Moon. And years later, he created a completely new version of this track with a similar title, What You Wanna Be When You Grow Up, for his 2004 album Blackballed. And Super Ho is another track that he did together with Snoop Dogg. It was recorded in the 90s and eventually it was released in 2009 on the Ultimate Death Row collection. And during this period, around 97 and 98, Lil Style also recorded tracks with Dez and Superfly, and he appeared on the track Baby Mama Drama that was released on Dez's album Retaliation, Revenge and Get Back that was released in 98. He also appeared on the track titled Every Day that was released on Superfly's album That Whoop-de-Whoop. It was officially released in 2001, but most of the tracks that were on that album were recorded around 97 and 98. And Snoop Dogg also used a sample of Lil C-Style and Swoop G from the Who Got Some Gangsta Shit track, and used those samples for the chorus of the track Sea Walking that was released on the Smokefest World Tour Underground album that was released in 98, and years later in 2004 this track was also released on the Welcome to the Church Volume 5 album. In 2007, Dez released the Independent Game DVD, which included some footage from 98, where Lil C-Style, Dez, Snoop, Trey D, Big C-Style and other Dogg Pound affiliates were hanging out together. And in one of those clips, Lil C-Style admitted that he used to steal a lot back in the days. And Snoop also confirmed this by saying he used to steal everywhere he went.
I was one of the main thieves. I used to steal a lot. Everywhere he went.
And in the track Eastside Connect Game, which featured Snoop Dogg and Lil C-Style, he also made a reference to him stealing a lot.
It was that known ass motherfucking rapper, Lil C-Style, cause I'm always thieving. Mom's one line when she said I was a heathen.
After 98, and when Snoop got signed to No Limit Records, tensions arose between Snoop and Lil C-Style, and while the exact cause of their disagreement remains unclear, Lil C-Style spoke about this in an interview, and he said, quote, "That shit go back so far as beef with Snoop. I can't even really say me and Snoop didn't really have beef, we just had a lack of communication. That was our problem. And then it was a lot of other motherfuckers saying shit to Snoop, they say I said, or then motherfuckers come back telling me shit Snoop said, so it was like escalated from there." End quote. And in 1999 and 2000, Lil C-Style even got back with Death Row Records, and he started working with them again, and he recorded 2 diss tracks aimed at Snoop. And the first track was Easy to Be a Soldier When There Ain't No War. This was in my opinion the dopest track on the Chronic 2000 compilation album that was released in 99. And on this track, The Realist, Swoop G and Lil C-Style took shots at Snoop Dogg and No Limit Records. And up next are a couple of things that Lil C-Style had to say about Snoop on that record.
Snoop Dogg switch gangs, talk about the east side, from who the Baton Rouge, man. I how you do that dirt with your long hair, bang out dirt, but in the hood you straight stir. Came and used the big OG, can't come to LBC or on 19th Street.
And according to Lil C-Style, the track evolved from an earlier underground song titled Dog Killer that he also did with Swoop G, and in an interview he spoke about this and he said, quote, "I see my homeboy Young Swoop and he was like, come to the studio. And I kicked the verse that I had on a street underground song called Dog Killer. That was the original song and I took a verse from that and that's what I made the Easy to Be a Soldier song out of." End quote. And the original Dog Killer track was also released on Swoop G's album titled World Don't Take Me Personally in 98, but they changed the title to Busters, the writer version. And on that track, Lil C-Style's last verse is almost the same as he used on the Easy to Be a Soldier track, as he also mentioned in that interview. And to promote the Chronic 2000 album, Death Row Records also did a promo tour and they performed at the Bahamas. And Lil C-Style was also part of the crew, and one of the tracks they performed on stage was Easy to Be a Soldier When There Ain't No War. And up next you can see a small clip of that performance. And before the Chronic 2000 was released, Death Row planned to release an album titled the Inside Out compilation, and that later evolved into the Chronic 2000. And online you can find some tracklist drafts for that album, and on one of those drafts you can also see a track titled Snoop Dogg / Bitch Dog by Swoop G and Lil C-Style, and this was likely just another title for the track Busters, the writer version, or Dog Killer. And years later, the Inside Out compilation was leaked, but the track wasn't included on that album. And I will make a separate video that goes more into detail about the Inside Out compilation, so stay tuned for that. In 2000, Death Row Records released the Too Gangsta for Radio compilation, and Lil C-Style also made an appearance on the track titled F*** Dre. And as the name indicates, this was a diss track to Dr. Dre, but Lil C-Style's verse was mainly a diss towards Snoop Dogg. And this is what he had to say on that track.
Ain't no telling what I'm gonna do when I catch that scary ass Snoop might blast you. You a bitch ass, punk ass, scary ass nigga who ain't gonna blast. I just might roll up and cuff your ass.
And Snoop Dogg also recorded a diss track towards Lil C-Style and Swoop G, and the title of the track was Gangsta Ride, and this was the original version because Gangsta Ride was also released on Snoop Dogg's album No Limit Top Dog. But on the original version, you can hear a verse from Dez instead of Silk the Shocker, and Snoop Dogg has 2 verses in which he dissed Lil C-Style and Swoop G. And Snoop Dogg also referred to Lil C-Style by calling him by his old nickname, which was Ron C. And up next is a small clip of what Snoop Dogg had to say about Lil C-Style.
What's up with this little style and Swoop G? Heard they tried to diss. They on my list. 2 years I got to get ready. Got kicked off the town cause you wasn't down and tried to diss half dead. But look at you now. Ron C and James Parker, y'all barking up the wrong tree. I'm with a real OG.
And in Snoop Dogg's track Sea Walking, which I mentioned earlier in this video, in which he also used samples of vocals from Lil C-Style and Swoop G from the track Who Got Some Gangsta Shit, there was also a line that Snoop said that might have been a diss to Lil C-Style and Swoop G, and this is what Snoop said.
You wanna cross us out and disrespect us? I must have thought we was busters or something. I dropped 2, I don't need you.
And in 2000, Snoop Dogg released a movie titled The Eastsiders, in which he also included a scene where he beat the brakes off somebody named Ron C. And this was a jab at Lil C-Style, because as I mentioned a couple of times already, his old nickname was Ron C. And up next is a clip of that scene.
ass motherfucker. Now we eat. Let this nigga run sweet cause I owe that nigga that.
And in an interview, Lil C-Style also mentioned that he got a nice check for the tracks that he recorded for Death Row Records, and he said, quote, "Then from there they wanted to sign me, so they gave me a $20,000 check. That was gravy. But then it wasn't finna be no come to the studio and just rap. I don't do that. What's the project? I wanna know what's the deal." And later he also added, "Then I had a gambling problem too, so that money wasn't shit. I'll shoot that shit on the concrete." End quote. And that Lil C-Style had a passion for gambling, or better yet, a gambling problem, was also evident because he rapped about it in a lot of tracks he recorded.
G stacked in my pockets, known for straight peeling niggas on the dice. Since I was 4, I've been a gambler. I used to gamble with my granddaddy playing dominoes, but now all I do is just hit casinos. Even though nowadays it really don't matter. Drop 1,000 a bet like Tony Montana, straight gangster. I know I never quit. I'd rather straight gamble than give it to a.
And in an interview, Lil C-Style also reflected on his time with Death Row, emphasizing that his diss tracks were his own decision and Suge didn't tell him to diss Snoop. And he said this, quote, "And to set the record straight and to clear the record for motherfuckers thinking that Suge had a motherfucker over there dissing Snoop, nobody never pumped me up to diss nobody. Anything I ever said on wax about anything or anybody, I said it because of my own mind, because I think for myself. Nobody fucking thinks for me. I ain't no puppet." End quote. And many fans wonder if Lil C-Style recorded an album or additional tracks under Death Row Records that remain unreleased or have yet to leak, but unfortunately that's not the case because Lil C-Style spoke about this in an interview and he said this, quote, "If I don't have no money, then I ain't saying shit. And that's the attitude I had when I was on Death Row. Like you motherfuckers don't give me no money, motherfucker I ain't do no songs. I don't give a fuck. Straight up." And later he also said, "I probably did like one other song on Death Row that they never put out. Or maybe I didn't do nothing. I just remember doing a song Easy to Be a Soldier When There Ain't No War, when me and Snoop was having our conflict, and on Too Gangsta for Radio when that shit boiled over." And it continued, "Other than that, fuck no." End quote. And during that interview, Lil C-Style was also asked about his perspective on Suge Knight, and he responded, quote, "I don't see Suge, and if I did see him, we'd respect each other man to man. We never had no conflict or none of that. Even though I feel he don't like me or didn't like me, but we ain't never had no conflict. Plus I'm tied in with the street shit too. My uncle from Suge Knight neighborhood. My uncle Double OG from over there named Stanley Pitt. He ain't no joke." End quote. And Lil C-Style was also asked about his relationship with Tupac, and he said, quote, "Tupac was my man, a spunky ass motherfucker that was just ready all the time. Just a cool ass motherfucker to be around. Love to rap, love to do music, love to have fun and chill. Love to be around a gang of motherfuckers." And when he was asked if he had recorded any songs with Tupac, he explained that unfortunately they have never collaborated on music, but they did share the friendship. And he said, "With Pac, I never get a chance to do no songs with Pac, but I knew him. And when I say I knew him, I ain't talking about, oh hey, that's Pac. He would leave and be driving, and we would be in a car for hours on the road, on the highway type of shit. Smoking weed, smoking blunts, falling asleep, waking up, that type of shit. Not just, oh, I know him cause he Tupac." End quote. And in a YouTube interview, Napoleon from the Outlaws also shared an interesting story about a fight that nearly broke out between Tupac and Lil C-Style during a basketball game at Snoop Dogg's house. He also appeared on a couple of other tracks. One of those tracks is titled Blue Liquid. It was released on the Thicker Than Water movie soundtrack in 1999. And this is actually a Swoop G and Beefy Loc track. And Lil C-Style only does some talking on the intro of the song. He also appeared on the track titled 1999 that was released on Daz's album Raw. And as I already mentioned in this video, on that track they used some of the lyrics that were also used on the track East Side Up, Eastsiders.
So eat up, Eastsiders. Cause me and my nigga technique, we ain't nothing but some riders. And can't a damn thing divide us. So east side up, Eastsiders. So ease up and recognize us. Me and my DAC, we ain't nothing but some riders. And can't a damn thing divide us. This some real ass motherfucking Eastsiders.
And Lil C-Style also appeared on the track titled Bang On 'Em, the remix.
Damn, not this again. Bang on them, let my nuts hang on them, don't swing on them.
It was a Crooked Eye track featuring Daz and Lil C-Style. It's unreleased, but you can find it online if you search for it. In 2003, the beef between Snoop, Dez, Suge Knight and Death Row, which was then rebranded as The Row, was still in full swing, and it seems that the issues between Snoop and Lil C-Style were resolved, and Lil C-Style was no longer affiliated with Death Row at the time, and interestingly, Lil C-Style also made a brief appearance on the Row Killer DVD, and as the name of the DVD indicates, Dez, Snoop and other DPG members such as Badass and Superfly dissed Suge Knight and Death Row on this DVD. In 2004, Lil C-Style released his only solo album titled Blackballed under the label Rocket Records, and for true fans of his music, it was a solid album that included several hard-hitting tracks. One of the standout songs to me was Blackballed, and he also dropped a music video for it. And another solid track on that album was Who Got Some Gangsta Shit Part 2 featuring Dez, and as the name already indicates, this was a remake of the first track he ever recorded on the Murder Was the Case movie soundtrack. In the 90s, early 2000s, rumors circulated on the internet claiming that Lil C-Style had passed away. However, these rumors were false. And to address the speculation, he also released a track titled Heard It Was a Rumor on the Blackballed album.
I heard it was a rumor Lil Style was dead. Was on the east side and got shot in the head. I know you don't believe that if you do, you're wrong. Come on, now how can I die and make these songs?
And in the Rhyme and Reason documentary, Lil C-Style mentioned that he was shot and that the bullet was stuck in his chest.
No, this one got stuck. Oh shit. Yeah, they got stuck when it.
So maybe that was the reason that the rumor spread that he got shot and passed away, which wasn't the case. And somewhere around 2005-2006, the DPG Uology DVD was released, and Lil C-Style makes a brief appearance in it. Lil C-Style also appeared on the track titled What Would You Do featuring
Daz and Pizzo too. Do you know how much purple we done blew?
And this track was released on the album titled OGCGM, which stands for Only God Can Judge Me, and I'm not 100% sure when this album was released. Some sources say it was 2005 and other sources say it was 2020. And around 2005, Lil C-Style also made a feature on the track titled What Up, which was released on AP9's album Body Shots, and the same track also appeared on Looney Corleone's Anger Management, the Re-Up album, but on this album the track was titled as Go Against Me, and for some reason Lil C-Style dissed Dr. Dre on this track, and in one line he also mentioned Eminem.
Now see Dre, that really gay on the real. Last Suge Knight, him out of all his reels. Wouldn't give a real lifestyle no deal. So go have the white boy fight trash ass, goes right for your black ass. Dre, you's a now Jimmy I been getting a piece of your ass.
And a few years later, in 2008, an urban comedy movie titled The Haunted House of Chronic was released, in which Lil C-Style played the role of Ray Spector, and his name is also visible on the front cover on the top left, and there's also an image of him on the back cover. Now, I haven't seen the movie myself, so I can't provide much more detail about it, but you can see the trailer online, and it seems like a low budget movie. 2 years later, in December of 2010, E1, Wide Awake / Death Row's distributor, officially announced that the LBC Crew's debut album, Haven't You Heard? We Give Us Something Back to the Street was scheduled for a February 8, 2011 release, and the track listing for it was also revealed. And as mentioned in the beginning of this video, the track list for this album was slightly different as the original album's track list as it was intended to be, and I will cover all those differences in a separate video. But around the same time that it was announced that the LBC Crew's album would be released in 2011, the original members, Badass, Lil C-Style and Technique, got back together for an LBC Crew reunion, and they recorded several tracks for an album that was unfortunately never released. And Lil C-Style appeared on the tracks titled Which Way Is Up, Already on the Scene, Don't Need Your Love, Persona, Turned Up, Don't F With You featuring Bo Rock, and also on Nice Girlfriend, which is also known as Why Buy the Cow. And in the years that followed, Lil C-Style appeared on several tracks. In 2012, he was featured on the track titled Real Goons, which also featured Young Life, The Realest, Goldie Loke of the Eastsiders, and Bo Rock. And in that track, Lil C-Style mentioned bumping Snoop's music.
Folk deep in the coop, niggas bumping some Snoop, homies drinking on some gin, listen some juice.
So that also indicates that the problems they had in the past were resolved. In 2016, he also appeared on the intro of Long Beach State of Mind Volume 2, and he was also featured on the track titled Cocaine White alongside Technique. The track was recorded for an album titled Gangsta Trap Music, which was set to drop in 2018. He also appeared on the track titled Gangsta Music that was recorded for King Sack's album that was released in 2018. And the last track that he was featured on is titled Are You Single, which was released on Dez's album Desamedes in 2018. And Lil C-Style doesn't rap on the track, but he does some talking over the beat. And there are actually two versions of this track. The version that was released on the album also features Sugar Free, and there's also a demo version without Sugar Free. Unfortunately, Lil C-Style got sentenced for attempted murder that took place in 2012. And if you do a Google search on Lil C-Style, you can find all the case details which have been published, and that describes what supposedly had happened. And to give you an idea, I will point out some of the things that were mentioned in the case details. And obviously, I don't know if it's true or not, because Lil C-Style also mentioned in an interview that he was wrongfully sentenced for attempted murder. But here are a couple of things that are described in the case details. Defendant Ronald Gillian was convicted of attempted first-degree murder, and firearm and great bodily injury enhancements were found to be true. The victim identified defendant, a gang member, to police as the shooter, but recanted at trial because victim intimidation was at issue. And later in the report it says, the victim John D was a reluctant witness. He admitted he did not want to testify. John D was forced to testify and was threatened by the police and the district attorney that he would be put in jail if he did not testify. And another part in the document says this. Jacqueline T lived in the apartment next door to John D. John D had known her for approximately 2 years, and the two had dated briefly. John D had seen defendant visit Jacqueline T a number of times. 2 weeks before the September 28 shooting, defendant was listening to loud music at Jacqueline T's apartment. John D asked him to turn the music down. At 9 p.m. on September 28 in 2012, as John D was returning home, he noticed Jacqueline T standing on the porch of the front house on the property, talking to the tenant of that house. John D was very intoxicated. John D stopped to talk to Jacqueline T, asking her why she had turned her back on their friendship. The conversation became heated. John D was very angry. John D left momentarily, and when he returned, he noticed that Jacqueline T was on the phone. He heard Jacqueline T say, "He over here tripping, you need to come and handle this." A crowd had gathered because of his argument with Jacqueline T, and he saw a 10 PT Cruiser pulling up to the property. John D had taken his glasses off and could not see very well, but it appeared that the defendant had gotten out of the passenger side of the car. John D saw defendant walk towards the back of the property where the apartments were located. John D did not see him again after that. As John D continued talking to Jacqueline T, he heard a gunshot and turned around. He saw flashes and realized he had been shot. John D was shot once in his elbow, once in his right leg, once in his left leg, 3 times in his stomach, and once in the back of his head. John D did not see the person who shot him. Later, while John D was still in the hospital, he gave a picture of defendant, also known as Lil C-Style, to detectives, which he had downloaded from an internet website that displayed defendant's rap album cover. He testified that he told detectives that defendant was present when he was shot, but not that defendant was the shooter. A neighbor, Tony R., identified defendant in a photographic array as the person he saw sneaking along the property toward John D's and Jacqueline T's apartments, and then sneaking towards where John D and Jacqueline T were arguing, just before shots were heard. At trial, Tony R. denied his statements to police and said that he had only identified defendant as a neighbor to police. Tony R. admitted he did not want to testify and was fearful of retaliation. John D's girlfriend, Karen R., testified that defendant went by Lil C-Style. She knew him because they grew up in the same neighborhood. There was also a Big C-Style and Tiny C-Style in the neighborhood. On September 30, 2012, Karen R. overheard a conversation between Big C-Style and Vivian Scott, also known as Peaches. A week later, on October 7th, Miss Scott visited John D in the hospital. Miss Scott asked Karen R. to leave the room so she could speak privately with John D. After Miss Scott's visit, John D was pretty shaken up and nervous. After the visit, John D said he did not want to cooperate with police. Based on John D's statements to police, Long Beach detective Sean Maggie identified Christopher Bowden, also known as Big C-Style, defendant, also known as Lil C-Style, and Michael Bowden, also known as Tiny C-Style, as possible suspects in the shooting. All 3 were members of the 19th Street Crips. Just before the shooting, defendant exclaimed, "These ants are going to get tired of f***ing with me, cuz." Defendant was several feet away and was holding a 9mm semi-automatic pistol. John D told Detective Garcia that defendant shot him 7 times. John D also told Garcia that defendant was a member of the 19th Street Crips gang. Defendant testified that he did not shoot John D. Defendant admitted that he was called Lil C-Style and that he released an album with his picture on the cover. Big C-Style was his mentor. Defendant was present at the Lime Street property on September the 28th to pick up some clothes. He witnessed some commotion and saw a skinny black man pull the gun on John D. Defendant ran away and heard 2 gunshots. And it's truly a shame how everything turned out, all because of this pointless beef over some loud music. Maybe Lil C-Style will be free one day and can get his life back on track. In an interview he did over the phone while he was in prison, he also mentioned that his name was being exploited to collect donations. He also said that if people want to make donations to him, they should contact Big C-Style through social media. So if you're interested in making donations, make sure to do it the right way and hit up Big C-Style for more information on how to do that. If you have any additional information on Lil C-Style that wasn't covered in this video, make sure to drop it in the comments below. Subscribe if you want to support this channel and also hit the thumbs up if you like this video. More videos are coming soon, so stay tuned and until the next one.
I ain't never got punked in jail or in death row.